But we start with Corey Lewandowski, a man who knows exactly how these fundraisers go, political strategist who managed Trump's campaign in 2016. All right, Corey, look forward for us. How much of tonight's speech is going to be about Trump being the victim? How much is Trump, I'm the victim because I am fighting for you, Mr. and Mrs. American, and the Biden administration doesn't like that? And how much is going to be about the future and rather than America going to hell, America with a bright future ahead?
I don't think we're going to see a lot about the future of the country or what the presidential campaign should be about, which is looking forward and making sure that everybody knows that our best days are still in front of us. Donald Trump is going to come out tonight in Bedminster. He's going to talk about the rigged system. He's going to talk about how he's been targeted by a partisan Department of Justice. I'm sure we'll hear about Hillary Clinton and her email scandal. I'm sure we'll hear about Joe Biden's documents that he kept in his garage. But the truth is going to be that tonight is going to give Donald Trump the opportunity to let his side of the story out for the first time since he's been processed under a federal indictment for a crime he committed, allegedly committed, since he's left the White House. This has nothing to do with election interference. This is all about the documents that he has kept at his home and didn't turn them back over. And that's what he's being prosecuted for. That's what he's been indicted for. And tonight, Donald Trump is going to lay out his case, why he doesn't believe that is fair. He'll talk about the Presidential Records Act, how there is no criminal component to the Presidential Records Act. He will talk about the fact that he's being targeted by a very political Biden White House. He will talk, my guess is, about Jack Smith and his previous experience prosecuting people like the former governor of Virginia and the current senator from New Jersey. And don't forget, it's important to note that Jack Smith's prosecution of the former governor of Virginia was overturned by the Supreme Court in a unanimous decision. So I think Donald Trump will talk all about those factors to lay out his case tonight of why he's being victimized.
Put on your advisor hat, though, for a second. Purely as a presidential candidate, even a former president, the idea that you're going to get 30 to 45 minutes of primetime cable news airtime, and a number of the networks will cover it. We certainly will here and carry it and then talk about it before and after. And to spend that time sort of relitigating this legal case against you, I'm wondering, who does he think he's really convincing with all this? Are there people out there that are undecided about whether or not Donald Trump was right or wrong in the documents?
Look, I think it comes down to you have to get to 270 electoral votes, and it's not an easy thing to do. And if you will grant me that the Republicans should win Ohio and Texas and Florida as an onset, that means we've got to play in Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, seems to be Arizona and Georgia. And if we don't do that, it doesn't matter if Donald Trump wins the Republican nomination. There's no path to victory in the general election. So I think, as the former campaign manager, as someone who's been in these rooms with Donald Trump on hundreds of occasions, to encourage him to go out and lay out his vision for America would be very important. It reminds me of coming off of the Iowa caucuses in 2016, where he finished second to Ted Cruz and was on the downward spiral in New Hampshire until we had a very candid conversation. And after that conversation, Donald Trump went out and told the American people what he wanted to do to make their lives better, to make America great again. And it was uplifting and it was visionary. And that's what propelled him to that victory in New Hampshire and ultimately to the Republican nomination and winning in 2016. More of that, less grievance is a path for success.
Well, we'll see if he takes your advice, because as you point out, in the past, he sometimes has with his advisors, sometimes is not. How much is on the teleprompter, how much is off? Corey, thank you very much. We appreciate it. It's good to see you. Thanks for watching. Go to newsnationnow.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And don't forget to subscribe. Click the red button to get more of NewsNation's fact-driven, unbiased coverage.